Greetings, everyone. Nick Ottinger here with Team Conti Sim Performance here in Xfinity Series at Pocono Raceway. So this is Season 3, Week 1, once again in the Xfinity Series. So I'm going to give you guys a track guide, pro track guide for what I'm doing here at Pocono, and really just some areas where you have to be cognizant of, in the entry of the corners, how to respond back to your initial throttle, how to maintain momentum, and where to create momentum at. So, with that said, I'm going to let this play through for the first 3 or 4 laps, and then I want to dissect a lap of each corner and then let it run through a little bit later in the actual 15 lap run I did. So, give you guys a baseline. This is on a looser option that is provided this week, and we'll just let this run through. All right, that's 3 laps. Just let it run through here. So I want to actually go back 1 lap and dissect this mentality I have going in turn 1, some qualities that we need to look at, and what the car is doing, what it's going to do, depending on how you're attacking entry. So as you see here, I'm not right up against the wall, right? I don't want to add any induced drag to the spoiler, slowing me down. In this quality of, Xfinity car, it's not mapped to do that, but this is something I have a habit of doing. But also, the flip side of that is why that is I stay away from the wall completely is because I want to put the splitter in the most optimal area down the straightaway, right? I don't want to add any air under it. I don't want to hit the track, with either the left edge or the right edge. So I'll either straddle this seam with the left front, putting the tire just underneath this dashed mark, or I'll drive on top of it. It's really what you want to do. I mean, I just have this quality of making sure I'm putting the front splitter in the most optimal areas as I can on the straight. So that said, I'm just going to let this walk through. You can hear a couple of times once you get to this area here, you're going to work into some bumps. on a straightaway. It's not end all be all, obviously, but you want to try to avoid these a little bit so you're not just going left and right. Because you can see here, getting ready to work through the bumps here, you see you have to do small corrections because of splitter contact on one edge and then just working through the bump. So just some qualities that not a lot of people may actually see and look at that can actually help you create all your momentum down into turn one and even turn two and turn three. So that said, I'm gonna start slowing this up, and now we're at a quarter speed, and we're gonna be turning away from this wall. You see this cone, and then you see the light down here on the fence, right? So I'm gonna slow this down even further. But I want us to think about how we're gonna transition to the brake pedal. This is the area before I even get to this cone. I'm thinking of how I need to get to my straight line quality of braking without pitching the car too much with the rear coming up, under braking transition, and getting the rear too light. So as a driver, there's a couple ways you can get the rear too light, in heavy braking induced corners, short tracks or a track like this, and that is using too much brake. Let's just say optimal braking, the ideal braking range is like 20%, okay, and you're going to 50%, you're possibly locking the fronts because you're using too much initially, or you're also pitching it too much because you have too much wheel angle abruptly turning away from this wall. So, a couple things to factor in. We go over that a lot when it comes to these braking characteristics at track. So, but I'm going to let this play very slow, and you can see I'm going to start turning away after I'm starting to get to my decel rate. You can see I have some wheel offset, so this is going straight parallel with the wall. And now I'm turning away once I'm starting to lift, right? So now I'm getting to my braking area, braking phase, and turn one, really bumpy, I would say, once you're diving into this compression zone, okay? This is before the Chevrolet billboard on the outside fence in a turn one. So you're working through, you're starting to go downhill a little bit down into a compression zone right here after the light. And you can see I'm limited braking, keeping it smooth as possible. Now I'm going to work across the seam, and that's where you're going to find that initial bump that you may feel with the splitter contact. Why we have splitter contact is because there's three unique corners here. This is more of a bank corner that you're having turn one at Pocono. Turn two is less banking and less duration staying in that banking. And then turn three is a lot flatter. So you really have to be optimal for two corners instead of just one at this track because they're so different. So that's how I approach that philosophy. But working through these bumps and crossing these seams, you can see maintaining consistent braking. And then once I cross this left front, I'm going to make sure early on in a run, I'm having this rolling phase down to this yellow line. Because if I'm on the brake and adding more wheel input here, and it may have some different characteristics depending on wind, wind direction and speed throughout the week, but I don't want to slip the fronts crossing the seam. I don't want to hit the bump even more aggressive because if I'm using brake, I'm just inducing, the front of the car staying pinned down to the track even more. So I want to get off that brake, let it get to a rolling phase, and really, once I get the right front across this seam to get to this yellow line, that is where I'm focused towards finding my ability to either get on the throttle or let it roll longer and create my momentum back to the corner exit. So we're well into the Chevrolet logo here, right? And I'm still rolling, and now I'm really about to hold my apex angle through turn one. So I'm going to get to partial throttle, and now I'm going to start thinking about how I need to wrap my apex. Keep the left front, keep it gripping, but not get too much throttle and use too much throttle with all this wheel inputs to shear the right rear off and create a loose condition. So my initial response will be stabilizing the car, keeping the front positive and keeping the rear having some traction. And then I'm going to focus on now I need to start wrapping my exit maybe for a little longer, but I'll find some points and markers on the wall that are good reference points to know when I get to 100% throttle, which is going to be pretty early because I'm going to be on this paint. But you see the Militech logo here. I'm working towards 100% throttle, a linear rate, and then in that phase, I'm 100%. You can see here. And then once you see the turn 1 Pocono, I'm going to be well off this bottom, open the wheel up to maximize my exit momentum. Same quality as we talked about for the straight. I'm staying away from the wall, trying to keep in this zone of not going through the bumps too much and scrubbing speed by having some splitter contact. So now we're going to work towards the tunnel turn, turn 2. You see a light and the single cone on the fence. This zone all through here is very important because it's very hard to see behind some people. So you have to really be aware and, again, cognizant of when you're going to turn away from the wall. But you want to make sure your lifting rate and wheel angle, like we have for turn 1, your lifting rate when you're coming off the throttle is smooth. It's not just dumping the throttle and then shaping wheel input into it, because you may actually pitch the car too aggressive to turn in to the tunnel turn. So slowing us down, we're at the 1 cone and I'm lifting at that 1 cone, right? So I just passed the 1 cone. The rear of the car is just past it, and you see the Pocono logo here. I'm transitioning to my brake pedal now. And now you see I'm turning away from the wall at the Pocono zone. The Pocono lettering on the tunnel turn entry. And here you can see very limited brake. I'm almost completely off of it now because I'm adding more wheel input. The car is actually in a loose condition. It's almost to its maximum slip angle I can do with the rear. And this phase later into a run will be very important to master in not turning in too late and overloading the right front. In other words, putting too much load on the right front and making it more resistant to turn. And sometimes you may be able to just enter a little bit lower, but get to this bottom seam and closest to the yellow line in a better avenue, because you want the front positive and angling down to this yellow line at a certain point. So slow it down a little bit more, crossing the seam in a rolling phase. Right front crosses it, right rear is crossing it now. And now you see this angle. Look at this angle I have to how this continuous radius, smooth radius from this point, which would be about the turn 2 red lettering, of where this point matters, because you want to make sure the left front is staying at this radius with the same angle that you can not add more wheel input or correct to open the wheel up at that point. You can see I crossed this seam with the left front, and then now I'm getting my partial throttle. Steering wheel is the same, right? Steering angle is the same. And now this corner is all about maximizing my momentum now. Instead of taking momentum out for longer, now I'm going to maximize this momentum, because now I'm going to get to this transition period of partial throttle, getting this left front closest to this actual yellow line and utilize this for your exit. And you can see here, there's a small, slope difference, right? You're kind of going through a bump, and then you're going to lose some actual banking, and then you're going to gain some banking for the exit of 2. So this is also where you can use too much wheel angle and clip this left front, like I did on lap 1 of this run, and really point yourself too early for exit of turn 2. But now you can see here, turn 2, 100% throttle, and you can see another abrupt angle here that's what I was referencing. Lap 1, I hit this with the left edge of the splitter and got offline a little bit. So that is a good key point to where you want to be the closest you can to that really black asphalt here, the darker asphalt, and on the actual painted line, so you can exit smooth. You don't have a lot of corrections, later into a run, because it's such a abrupt closing rate to the wall here on exit of 2 because of how much momentum you got to carry. And you can get loose here continuously, and you can also wreck because you open the wheel up too soon. So better to have that point off of turn 2 for the tunnel turn and realize, hey, that's where I need to get the left run at. Now, turn 3, not as important to stay away because it's not as long of a straight you're going to be here as you would be in the front stretch and, the Long Pond Straight is what it's also called before the tunnel turn. So here is very important that you can actually manage a different deceleration rate, a different throttle time when you're going to come off of the throttle at a slower rate or a more of an abrupt rate, because this is the flatter section, right? You got to keep the car turning. But you see, we just passed the one cone. I'll rewind it here. There's going to be a one cone right here, as you can see. And I'm going to start shaping my entry into it, turning away actually before I start lifting. And now once I start lifting, I'm going to do a slower rate before I even get to the brake. Why that is important in a flatter section, think of it like New Hampshire. You don't want to get instantly to the brake pedal and then pitch the car too aggressive and get it free on entry. You want to maximize your angle, whether you're doing the arc, that you want to do, and then you can get off this brake with the front still keeping, proactive and positive and turn. So really key to think about this painted line as obviously your lowest apex angle, and you can see the width of the car pretty much is on the paint, and the right sides are going to be on the seam. So race trim wise, I don't want to get to this paint too early, because that arc that I would have, if I had a shallow entry, I'm going to take some of that capability away to wrap this angle like I need to and get to it with not having to add too much wheel angle in the steering wheel, because I don't want to add more slip to the fronts. We may be a little bit tight because of this being a flat corner. And so I don't want to get to here earlier and take center speed away, but also I don't want to take front turn away because I don't want to be at my limits of the fronts too early. So you can see on this seam, using this paint, still going to wrap it a little bit longer, and you can see I'm correcting a little bit. That's because the right rear is on top of the seam and trying to cross into this, second lane that we'll talk about, and trying not to get to it too early and making sure you're wrapping here a little bit longer. But now I'm in 100% throttle phase. This area here, we cross this seam, right, with the left rear tire. It could push us tight because of the angle we have with our steering wheel, and just open it up too early and then add more wheel input to turn it away here from the wall. And then once we cross this seam is also very important too, not to open the wheel up too early, because this is very parallel and straight off of turn 3 to where this is still flat. We're still pretty flat and banking. So we're going to we don't have all that extra corner load to really help us get off the corner like we would have at turn 1. So want to make sure we're not getting too free. The closer we get here, we're crossing the seam again, and then we'll get into the wall. So now I'm going to start my whole process again and getting down away from the wall just to make sure the splitter is optimal in the front stretch. So that is obviously us dissecting each corner, but now I want us to look at, I would say, lap 12, and just let it run through here one lap, and then I'll let it go to chase view for the next lap. See how I'm still using that yellow line as a reference for the exit 1. Making sure I'm not getting down there too early. Off the brake, using less brake, turn in a little earlier. Obviously this is later into a run. Lose condition off the 2, but that's because I was too aggressive in 100% throttle moment. See, exit of 3 is a little bit lower as well. So let's go to chase view, let it play for a lap, and then we close the video. All right, so that's gonna do it for us on this week's provided video, and we talked about a couple points. Obviously, turn one important. Make sure we're not going through the bumps. Remember that you can actually have a shallower entry and get into the bumps even more aggressive because you're using more brake to slow it down the closer you are and the lower you are to that bottom line. So factor that in. Make sure you have the angle that you need, and then your turn two. You just seen how you can have a wider arc in a turn two, a later entry, and also pits the car too aggressive, and that can give you a little bit of a process of delaying when you need to get to your partial throttle, forcing you into a tighter situation. Turn three, you could see the same things. We talked about early on, not getting down to the yellow line as early, but you can see at lap 13, it was really important to get the car down earlier to that line so we have the grip. Now, those are things that's always going to be evolving at this track. You may have dirty air you have to deal with, but you may also have to deal with, just turning a little bit later because of the wind's going to actually create a loose condition in turn three. So a lot of variables to think about, but this is why I love Pocono, because it's three different unique corners, and they call it the tricky triangle for a reason, but it really makes you as a driver be aware and adaptive to situations and different corner traits. So that's going to do it for us this week. Team Conti Sim Performance's Xfinity Pro Track Guide here. And if you guys got any questions, please just only a message away, comment, maybe send a Discord message, tag me, or if you got anything you just wanna ask. I am in, DMs are open. So you guys have a good one. Let's have a good start to season 3. And yeah, we will catch you guys on the racetrack.